Hello, good morning, everyone. It's about 3:30 a.m. in New York City, and I couldn't be happier to be here. It's a real honor. So thank you for coming. Thanks for listening. And today, I'm here to talk about risky business. And what do I mean by risky business? I mean how to grow your startup by thinking like a venture capitalist. So why are we here? We're here because growing a startup is really hard. It's really hard. If you've got a startup, if you've worked at a startup, you worked on any kind of business, you know just how hard it is to grow your customer base, to grow your revenue. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here. We would all be up on the beach in Sopat or wherever we want to be, chilling, eating ice cream, etc., drinking beer. But instead, we're here because growing is hard. And I think that there's an interesting parallel between growth hackers, folks who work on growth at startups, and venture capitalists, which I want to explore. But the theme of the talk basically comes down to this. This is from Naval Ravikant, who's the co-founder of AngelList, a good friend of mine and my former boss. He says, it's never been easier to start a company. It's never been harder to build one. What does that mean? Well, the price of technology, all the cloud services, software as a service, everything that you need to actually start your business has gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over the years. But it's actually been way harder to get anyone's attention. As the price of starting a startup gets cheaper, the amount of competition for people's attention goes up. So I encourage you to think like an investor. Venture capitalists spend all day looking at pitches from startups, evaluating bets, and we're going to see a lot of that happening here on this stage, actually, and see finalists tomorrow. And I think that by thinking like an investor, you can avoid this kind of mess. If you work on growth at any company or marketing, whatever it is, your day-to-day might look like something like this if you use Trello. You've got your head super deep in the weeds. You've got your charts and Google Analytics, your A/B tests, your stats, your product roadmap, and it all gets a little bit overwhelming. You're kind of down in the weeds, down in the dirt, doing the work of growing your startup. And I'd encourage you to think a little bit more like this guy, like a stereotypical VC. This is a HBO Silicon Valley reference, so I apologize if it doesn't translate. You don't need to be a jerk like this guy, but you can think like an investor, have a fancy car, and grow your startup. So today I want to talk about 8 lessons to learn from VCs that you can apply to your startup. The first one is that growth is a series of bets. In the same way that VCs evaluate companies, you can evaluate all the different ways that you can grow your own company as if it were an investment, because that's kind of what it is. So when VCs look at a company, they look at the market, how big the market is. They look at the quality of the product. They look at the quality of the team. And I'd encourage you to think of everything you do at your company in terms of growth in a similar way. It's like your portfolio of experiments to grow your company. So instead of market, product, and team, you've got impact, confidence, and ease. The way that you're looking at the things that you can do to grow your company, this is how you might evaluate them. And this comes from Sean Ellis, who founded growthhackers.com. I encourage you all to check out his stuff. It's pretty good. He's got a good book on it called Hacking Growth. Ultimately, the key message here is that you're investing time and resources in experiments to grow your company, not money. But time and resources are just as finite. You've got a small team. You're working at a startup. You're trying to get more customers, more revenue, more retention, whatever it is. I think it's helpful to approach it the same way. The second lesson I think we can take for venture capitalists is to make big bets. Every VC who's investing money is investing in the hopes that your company turns into the next Uber or Facebook or any number of other huge companies, because that's the way that VCs actually return their portfolio, is making huge bets. This is from Mark Andreessen, founder of Andreessen Horowitz, founder of Netscape, who says that out of 10 swings of the bat, you get maybe 7 strikeouts, 2 base hits, and if you're lucky, 1 home run. And the base hits and the home runs pay for all the strikeouts. Now, I don't really know much about baseball, but the same thing applies to growth at your company. So the way I try to think about it is, if you're thinking about an experiment, you're thinking about some way to grow your company. Let's say you want to build a mobile app for your business. What's the best thing that could happen if your app is wildly successful? What's the best outcome for your experiment? And if you're going to spend a lot of time doing something and the best outcome isn't that great, I'd encourage you to think again. This is the same reason that VCs look for big markets, because if the company has to go against all the odds and succeed, you want to make sure that there's a big enough market to satisfy that. So I think risky bets should have the potential for great outcomes. Now, there's one part of growing that's a little bit different than VC, which is that we also have the opportunity to make small, kind of more sure bets, what I would like to call small wins. So a little bit of math. If you do 16 small experiments that get you a 5% increase, you do end up doubling your growth. So that's something to balance with these kind of risky home run bets. You can also spend a little bit of time doing these kind of incremental small wins. Maybe devote 1 day a week, 1 day every other week to doing something like that. The third lesson from VCs to apply to growing your startup is to double down on winning bets. Doubling down is a term, of course, that comes from blackjack. I'm not much of a gambler, but Roger Ehrenberg from IA Ventures in New York City says it's how the follow-on decision is played that big money is either made or lost. VCs, when they're investing in a company, need to try to follow on in all their investments to ensure that they get the largest return. So if you invest in the first round of, say, Uber, and we're going to look at an example of that later, it's not just that you invested in their first round. You have to keep reinvesting as the company raises more money in order to maintain your ownership stake. And the translation to working on growth at your company is that if you find something that works, you really have to stick with it. It's hard enough to find something that is providing a ton of growth for your company. So if you find it, double down on it. If you find that, for example, like we talked about before, that you created a mobile app and it's leading the growth for your business, keep working on it. Keep adding more features. Keep trying different experiments to see if that app can yield more results for you. This is from Brian Belfour, who founded Reforge and did growth at Airbnb and HubSpot. Reforge is a growth school, basically, in San Francisco. He says, double down before you diversify. You'll increase your chances of success and your growth rate at the same time. The fourth lesson from VCs that you can apply to growing your startup is to be objective. Another quote from Naval: if you can be more right, more rational, then you're going to get nonlinear returns in your life. Decision making is everything. I think this is important because when we're designing experiments or working on product features, whatever it is, it's pretty easy to get attached to the things that you're working on. You think, okay, we made this app, maybe it's not working, but I really think this is going to work. We're going to spend another week, another month on this. And I think it's really important to try to be as objective as possible when you're deciding whether to keep investing in a particular experiment. Now, I'm going to walk back what I just said and offer one more perspective. At the same time, while you're being objective, sometimes you really just have to trust your gut. This is from George Zachary, who's a partner at Charles River. He says, listening to my gut is the right thing to do for me. It doesn't mean it's going to work out, but when I followed my brain and my heart, and not my heart, it's resulted in disaster and failure every time. Regardless of whether you're being super data-driven, trying to be as objective as possible, or you're trusting your gut and going with experiments that you feel like are right, ultimately, you have to be honest with yourself and with your team about what's working. You're going to set goals for your company, whether that's to increase your revenue, your retention, sign up a new number of users, or get more downloads. And ultimately, at the end of the week or the quarter or the year, you're going to have hit those goals or not, right? So you have to be honest with yourself and with your team if you want to grow. Lesson number 5 out of 8 for how to grow your company, learning from VCs, is to craft a hypothesis. So a lot of venture capitalists have what's called a thesis or some kind of hypothesis that drives their investment. This one is from Union Square Ventures. They managed to distill their thesis down to a tweet. They said, invest in large networks of engaged users, differentiated by user experience, and defensible through network effects. Here's another tweet-length VC thesis from Kanye. Yeezy VC invests in and develops food, clothing, shelter, and communications. Kanye is succinct, and he's got a real thesis for what he's going to invest in, i.e. everything. So you got to ask yourself, what's driving your growth? I think it's important to have a hypothesis about, just as a venture capitalist, to say, this is what we think is happening in the world. This is how we're going to invest because this is where we see the world is going. You should ask yourself, what's driving the growth of my company? And I think we can dig into a couple of quick real-world examples here just to show how having a model, having a hypothesis can help. The first one's from Uber. This is from Andrew Chen, who ran the driver-side growth team at Uber and was an old friend of mine back in San Francisco. And what you've got here is kind of classic startup flywheel. On the right side, you've got more drivers, which leads to more geographic coverage and saturation, which leads to a lot of really beneficial effects. We've got faster pickups, less driver downtime, lower prices, which leads to more demand from customers, from people who want rides. And as there's more demand, that leads to more drivers, and you get this beautiful flywheel of growth happening. And so Andrew's thesis at the time was if we can just add more drivers, that's going to keep this flywheel going, and Uber's going to grow like crazy. And I think if you look at the results, I think he was probably right. I've worked for 5 years at AngelList in San Francisco and New York. I started their startup recruiting platform, which has grown to be one of the biggest startup recruiting platforms in the world. And we tried to do the same thing that Andrew did for our recruiting marketplace. So on one side, this is going to look pretty familiar. We have candidates on the left side, those who are looking for a job. And we have recruiters, recruiting companies on the right side, folks who are looking to hire candidates. And we basically tried to create a model of what we thought was going to happen in our marketplace. And the first time we did it, we thought, OK, we're going to get more companies onto the platform. That's going to attract more candidates who are then going to apply to more companies. We're going to get a flywheel going that way. And it turns out we were wrong. We spent a whole quarter trying to focus on company growth. We got a ton of new companies to sign up. Everybody was feeling really happy, except that it didn't actually increase the kind of overall marketplace health of our ecosystem. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, OK, maybe it's actually candidates that are driving growth. And we spent another quarter or two actually trying to get more candidates to sign up. And we found that there was that kind of follow-on effect there. Candidates who have a great time on AngelList finding a job, if they have a good experience talking to companies and get a job quickly, they tend to tell other candidates about that experience. They tend to refer other people. They start applying to more companies, and that gets that kind of flywheel growth again. So even if you're wrong, I think it's helpful to try to create a model like this. You can refine it over time, but it'll help you judge whether or not the experiments you're doing kind of fit into your model of the universe. Lesson number 6 of 8, and I think this one is important, to think long term. When you're down in the weeds, like that stereotypical growth hacker bro that we looked at in one of the first slides, you got you're hunched over your laptop with your Google Analytics open and all these different things, it's hard to actually think about what's going to happen over the lifetime of your startup. This is from David Pacman, who's a partner at Venrock in New York. He says, we're really patient long-term investors. We're wondering what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years in startup land as an operator is like a lifetime. We can all get super focused on what's happening today. Did we hit our numbers of signups today? What about this week? What about this month or this quarter? But the truth is, if your startup is successful, it's going to be around for a long time. And you need to be thinking about what's going to happen, not just this quarter, but next year and the year after that. And ultimately, a lot of strategies for growing your company actually require a ton of time. I think the canonical example for this is working on SEO for search. There's really no way you can do it in a week or a month or even a quarter. And so if you're super focused on that short term, you're going to miss out on a lot of those opportunities. Here's another example from the AngelList about thinking long term. So back when AngelList was just actually an email list of 2 guys running the email list, Uber raised their first round partially from AngelList investors. So if you were an investor at the time on AngelList in 2010, you got this email from Nivi, one of the founders, that said, hey, there's this company called UberCab. They've been in the App Store for 2 weeks. They have 10 cars doing about 10 rides each. And do you want to invest? Yes or no? And if you're thinking super short term, you're thinking about 10 rides per car. That's nothing. How is this going to compete with taxis? What's going to happen here? But anyone who invested there has literally made thousands of times of return on their investment. So thinking long term serves investors well, and I think it can serve you well if you're working on growth at your own company. You got to give your bets the time they need. 7th lesson, be optimistic. I think this is super important because there's one huge difference between investors and people who are actually on the ground working at startups. And that's that if you're working at the company, you've got skin in the game. It's not just an investment for you. It's your day-to-day. It's your blood, sweat, and tears. And if you're an investor and one of your bets goes wrong, well, OK, we've got another 9 or 10 or 20 or 100 bets that you've got. But at least most of us, only work at one startup at a time. It's enough work just to do one. So it's hard to remember to be optimistic. This is from Jeremy Liu, who's a partner at Lightspeed. He says, optimism beats paranoia. You don't need to be paranoid to survive, but you need to be an optimist to thrive. And so back at AngelList, I actually had an all-hands meeting with everyone who worked on the recruiting platform, and I bought these little patches that say, "Be optimistic." And I tried to encourage everyone to put them on their laptops or on their laptop bags, because it's important not to get down. A lot of your bets aren't going to work, but you still got to get up in the morning. And this last one, the last lesson to learn from VCs when you're thinking about growth, is that reputation is everything. Last quote from Naval, I promise. Since the angel community is very small and the entrepreneur community is very small, your reputation is everything. And in context here, he's talking about how there's really not that many people in the world, especially in your particular town or country or whatever it is, who are investing in creating startups. If you do something wrong there, if you treat somebody poorly, chances are you're going to have to deal with that person again. I think the same is true in the startup world, again, from Sean Ellis, who founded growthhackers.com. Reputation is everything. And I bring this up because while you're growing, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to grow in ways that are kind of in a gray area, where, let's say, you could buy an email list or send emails to your, encourage your customers to send email invitations to their friends. Maybe it's not really something that they wanted to do, but it's definitely good for your numbers. It's going to help you grow. I just encourage you to remember that your brand is important. You really only get one shot of this, and to be good to your users, because they're going to remember what happens there. So we've talked today about 8 lessons for growing that we can learn from venture capitalists. Just to go over it again, we got growth is a series of bets, and you should make super big bets when you can, and double down on the ones that are winning. Finally, you should try to be objective, although you can also trust your gut. Craft a hypothesis, think long-term, and be optimistic, and remember that reputation is everything. So the next time you're worried about how you're going to grow your startup, I'd encourage you to think like an investor and see if that can help you turbocharge your growth. So thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time, or we can go on to the next.